Siblings, what devious secret are you hiding from your parents? It all started when he buried his head under my skirt. He kept trying to dare me to climb up to an old treehouse, which I finally did, only to realize he could see up my skirt as I was climbing up. I yell at him to stop looking and he acts like I was being gross for thinking he was. Whole situation was super weird, so I just brushed it off and never said anything about it again. A few months later, I caught him going through my photos on my laptop. A huge fight ensued, of course, and my parents got involved. He tells them he was trying to delete an ugly picture I took of him, and somehow my parents see it as we're both in the wrong. I don't have anything scandalous on there, but it just felt so off for him to be going through my pictures. 2 years later, when we were moving into a new house, my brother and I found out that we were going to be sharing a bathroom. My brother acted annoyed, but I could see the smirk on his face. He never knocked when I used the bathroom. Instead, he just tried to see if the door was locked. Eventually, the inevitable happens. I forget to lock the door, and he barges in. Luckily, I was half decent. I tell my parents about this, and instead of the solution being he should knock, the solution is I should use the guest bathroom downstairs. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. A few nights ago, after a family barbecue, I came back to my room and noticed the sweatpants I had changed out of before everyone arrived were out of the laundry hamper and on the floor. When I got up to do the laundry the next morning, I realized the panties I was wearing with those sweatpants were gone. I wanted to scream my brother's name and storm into his room, scolding him, but there would be no use. The thought of confronting him over it and him gaslighting me again was honestly so exhausting I just didn't say anything. I knew my younger brother was the culprit, but had no hard proof, and I was certain that if I confronted him or told my parents, he would just gaslight me again and make me feel crazy. So I came up with a plan. I went to the store and bought a few packs of cheap, brightly colored underwear, the kinds of panties an older sister would never wear. I made sure to hide the receipt and packaging so no one would know I had bought new underwear. Over the next week, I started mixing the new panties in with the rest of my laundry. Siblings, what devious secret are you hiding from your parents? I made sure to wear them once so they would have my scent on them. Just as I suspected, a few days later I noticed some of the bright pink and orange thongs were missing from my dresser. But this time I said nothing and acted oblivious. The next part of my plan was a bit sneaky. I was eating in the kitchen while my friends were over, and I spilled some food on my skirt. I excused myself to use the bathroom while my brother had friends over. After finishing up, I made sure to not flush the toilet. Then I quickly snuck into my brother's room. Going through his hamper, I found one of the bright thongs I had planted crumpled up among his clothes. Gotcha. Filled with the evidence, I decided to finally confront my brother. With my parents out at dinner, I called him into my room. I know you've been stealing my underwear, I said bluntly, throwing the pink thong at him. His face turned beet red and he started stuttering excuses, but I cut him off. Save it. I'm done with you perving on me, and then manipulating me into thinking I'm crazy. It ends now. My brother started to protest, but I gave him a death stare. Unless you want Mom and Dad to find out about your disturbing panty obsession, you'd better knock it off. My brother's shoulders slumped in resignation. I'm sorry, okay? I don't know why I did it. Just please don't tell them, he pleaded. I'll do anything, I promise. He was on his knees in the dark room, hands together, looking up at me. My eyes lit up. Anything you say? Anything? It was a good thing that I was wearing a skirt. It was easy to take off. My brother's eyes grew wide. I handed the skirt to him. Get the stain out of this skirt, I said. Do my laundry until I move out, and make sure my room is clean every single day. He agreed, and I actually think he felt ashamed. I walked out of the room to get changed into another skirt. Things have been better since the confrontation. I make sure to lock the bathroom door now, and my underwear stays in my dresser. I'm moving out for college soon, so won't have to deal with his weirdness much longer. But I feel stronger knowing I finally stood up for myself, instead of letting him manipulate. What tedious secret will you never tell your parents? I spent the night at a friend's house. There were supposed to be 4 of us there that night, but there were only 3. We were covering for our 4th friend, Ava, who decided to spend the weekend with her boyfriend. He was some skeevy 25-year-old man in the city. Around midnight, the phone rang. It is our 4th friend. Ava and her boyfriend got into a fight, and he put her out of his house. She is calling from a payphone because he kept her cell. Being the good friends we were, we immediately went to go get her. Due to the fact that she's Baltimore, Maryland, I thought it was a good idea to let my dad know about it. In an instant, my 2 friends disagreed. They feared that they would get into an immense amount of trouble from their parents, and they weren't willing to take that risk. I gave in. We printed off directions, loaded into my car, and left. After 2.5 hours arriving in Baltimore, we pulled up to the store our friend called from. We looked everywhere in the surrounding area, but she was nowhere to be found. We asked the guy in the store. He told us she was there, but she argued with some guy for a bit, and when the clerk threatened to call the cops, she left with the dude she was arguing with. We ended up driving around a bit, hoping that Ava was somewhere nearby. The store was within walking distance, so she had to be somewhere near there. My friend got the idea that if she left with a dude, it had to be the boyfriend. This meant that she definitely had her phone on her. We call, and yeah, she's with him. Everything is good. She meant to call us, but they were talking and he was apologizing and trying to make up with her. We told her that we were in the city, and she absolutely freaked. She tells us we blew things out of proportion. Which parent did we drag up there for nothing? She asked. When we told her that we came up alone, she was beyond surprised. You guys are so sweet. You are the best friends a girl could ever have. Ava offered to swing by and meet the boyfriend, so we did. When we showed up, the boyfriend shooed our friend away. He insisted that we were to come in. We decline. He insists again, and we tell him we will in a bit. But for now, we are thinking about running back to the store for a drink. Let me come with you, he said. I was hoping this guy would get the dang hint, but he didn't. What tedious secret will you never tell your parents? He was a creep. We drove away before he could say anything else, and after an hour of deciding what to do, we came back. We couldn't just leave our friend here. He then invites us to spend the night. It's a little after 3 a.m., and you guys don't want to drive all that way back home at this hour. Come in, meet my friends, spend the night and head home in the morning. Our parents will find out. We can't. Sorry. He smirked. Well, you don't want to bring your friend behind, do you? He was right. We couldn't. It might have been stupid, but we decided to go into the house. Once we got in, it reeked of smoke. Glass bottles were lying everywhere, and there were 3 of his other friends lying on the sofa. They all had to be in their high 20s. They all looked wasted. Ava was standing away from them, in the kitchen, clearly uncomfortable. As soon as the 3 of us walked in, the boys on the couch jumped up and started to get all up on us. The one on me cornered me onto a wall, and he put his hand over my head. I could smell his disgusting breath. When I looked to my left, I saw that my other 2 friends were getting the same treatment. I told him that I was uncomfortable, but he didn't listen to me. He grabbed me on my chest area, and I kicked him in between his legs. At that moment, all 4 of us, including Ava, sprinted out the door and hopped into my car. We drove away, not looking back. We made it home around 5:30, just in time before we got caught. Ava ended up dating the dude for a few months more, despite our protest that he was a bad dude. He ended up dumping her when he came down to visit and tried to pressure her into doing it. When she said no, he tried to force himself on her. She hit him. Looking back, I am able to see that we were clearly taken advantage of, especially Ava. Years have passed since this, and Ava ended up getting into other bad and abusive relationships. But a year ago, she managed to find a boyfriend that was right for her. And no, he's not 10 years older than her. None of us have told our parents about that night. What's the saddest thing someone told you before dying? My wife's Japanese grandfather was a brilliant man and a highly respected physicist in his day. Now in his 80s, he was a wise and gentle soul. As his health declined, he began living with us. He did not speak English at all, but I thought his quiet, calming presence would not be a burden to my wife, as she cared for our 3 young children at home. It was just another mouth to feed. So I agreed to have him live out his last years with us. When he moved in, he chose certain daily chores for himself. He opened the curtains every morning and closed them every evening. He kept the entryway clean and straightened the shoes. He swept the crumbs from under the dining table after every meal. But most of all, he insisted on greeting me at the top of the stairs every day after work. He would take my arm and lead me to the dining table where he had set out tea for us to drink. He would talk about his day in Japanese. I always loved hearing his voice, even though I had no clue what he was saying. Then it was my turn to unburden myself with the cares of the day. We finished our tea, and I felt deeply refreshed and ready to engage with my wife and children. At first I thought I was humoring him because he was lonely, but over time, I realized that he was doing it for me. He was helping around the house in order to make my life easier. I would be able to unwind from my hectic day, better enabling me to enjoy and connect with my family. Then, all of a sudden, his health took a dramatic turn for the worse. He started becoming weak and frail, losing his appetite. Within a week, he could barely walk on his own. My wife and I cared for him as best we could at home, trying to make him comfortable, but his condition continued to deteriorate. One morning, he struggled to get out of bed. His breathing was labored and he seemed disoriented. His hand was pressed tightly against his chest, and his breathing was labored as he leaned against the hallway. My wife called me from my dressing room as I was getting ready for work. She asked if she should call an ambulance. Her grandfather looked at her sharply and shouted, "No!" He understood what she had said perfectly. Our eyes met, and he nodded his head with finality. I knew he was dying. He didn't want to spend his final hours latched up to IVs and tubes. He wanted to die at home. My wife paced back and forth, wringing her hands. "We must do something. What can we do?" "Maybe I should call the paramedics and ask them," I answered. "If you call them, they will come," she continued. "What if they could help him? They could add months or even years to his life. What if they can just ease his pain?" "That's not what he wants," I answered. "He has lived a full life. He's ready to die." "What's the saddest thing someone told you before dying?" "He wants to pass it home with his family around him. But what if? What if? What if?" she stammered. Her body was shaking, her beautiful face twisted with doubt and anxiety. I thought of her, and her love for her grandfather. I realized that if he died in our home that morning, she would always blame herself. She would never have closure on whether or not she could have done something more. I looked into his eyes. He looked downward and nodded his head without saying a word. Neither of us had spoken. I went to the telephone and called the paramedics. They arrived shortly afterward. Her grandfather was calm and assisted them as best he could getting up onto the gurney. He smiled at everyone, including me. I felt as though I had betrayed him and did not deserve his generous forgiveness. I had made a conscious choice in favor of my wife's tender conscience over his final wishes. I knew it was the only choice I could make, but it grieved me to make it. 45 minutes later, I arrived at the hospital. He was in the cold, sterile emergency room, surrounded by strangers, with tubes in his nose, needles in his arms, strange, incomprehensible voices shouting urgent commands filling his ears, and bolts of electricity jolting his chest. It was where he initially didn't want to die, but seeing his daughter like that, he changed his mind. There was one point when I was the only person in the room with him. My wife and kids were out with the doctor. As I was sitting beside him on his bed, he said something to me. It was the first time I had ever heard him say a sentence in English. It was broken English, but I knew what he was trying to say. "Thank you for choosing my granddaughter. Cherish your time. Make it beautiful." He gave me a final nod. I don't think I needed to respond. In an instant, the monitor started beeping, and I was asked to leave the room. 5 minutes later, a doctor emerged and said he had passed it. I turned and walked out into the parking lot and burst into tears. "Please, I ask that you cherish your life and enjoy what you have in front of you. Love your parents. Love yourself. Love everyone in your life. Love and appreciate the present moment, because you never know when it will be too late. Cherish your time. Make it beautiful."